The world now in the grip of a crisis. There are demonstrations, protests, unemployment, inflation everywhere, and grievances, discontent, arrests, rebellion, revolt, and victims. There is virtually a world war, and no peace, stability, safety, peace of mind, or hope in the social, economic, and political environment prevailing in the world now. The world is based on the theory of colonizer and colonized, master and slave, and rich and poor, and on the theory of wage, hiring, trafficking, representation, marginalization, negation, and cynical disregard for the broad masses. Thus, hundreds of millions are represented by hundreds of individuals, which is regrettable, ridiculous, and futile. For instance, we find a country of 300 million people with a parliament of 300 members, which is laughable, unfortunate, and problematic. The 300 million have realized that the 300 representatives do not express their desires, share their dreams, or represent them, and, hence, bypass them and declared that representation is a fraud. It is fraudulent to bring 300 people and claim that they have the 300 million and the 300 representatives only represent themselves and cannot dream of the millions or share their desires and their feelings. Therefore, representation failed and the peoples have gone beyond it. Thus, the people and the representatives are not on the same page. There may be a parliament which claims that it was elected, and is possible that the election in few cases was not rigged, but the peoples have given up on parliaments and representatives, and we see them out on the streets expressing their demands directly. This is proof that the representatives have failed to speak for the peoples. When some governments decided to go to war against Iraq, millions demonstrated against the war. What does this mean? It means that the representatives did not express the demands of these peoples that had elected them, because if they had spoken for the peoples and shared their wishes and dreams, they would have opposed the war. Therefore, representation is a fraud, which means that scores of people are ruled by dictatorial regimes and are not represented by parliaments, because these parliaments approve the dispatch of forces. How can the parliament approve when the people do not? Hence, the parliament does not represent the people. Representation is a fraud, and mediation, representation, and parliaments must be abolished. This farce must be placed in the museum as an ancient relic, because peoples can rule themselves. But how can a people of 300 million rule themselves? We are accustomed to a government consisting of 20, 15, or 10 ministers who govern, and parliament consisting of scores of people or hundreds of people sitting in a chamber that accommodates scores of people or hundreds of people who decide for the people. But how can the people rule themselves by themselves? How can the people, men and women, sit in session and rule themselves by themselves? Naturally, the short-sighted view would say that that is impossible and settle for representation with a few people representing millions. This view is erroneous, as it views democracy as a matter of distance and size of chambers, but that is not the way to view it. Wherever the people are found, whether in the neighborhood or the village, they convene in people's congresses in which all adults, men and women, participate and decide what they want. Then, if the entire people decided to declare war against the state, then that war would be legitimate, because the people felt that war was inevitable with that neighboring state or a state that is separated from it by an ocean and continents, although that would be highly unlikely. If a law was passed, it would be passed by the people, the adult men and women sitting in session. Then, if you were sentenced to death under that law would be sacred, because it was passed by all the people who felt that such a crime should be punishable by death, and you yourself were among those who deliberated and eventually decided that the perpetrator of such a crime deserves the death punishment. So you would willingly submit to the punishment because you took part in drafting the law and were convinced of it, because it would not be fair for you to submit to such a punishment under a law passed by others. Those others may be called a parliament, a government, a revolutionary council, or what you will. Such a law that you had no hand in, you would not obey, not only in regard to capital punishment, but even in paying a fine, imprisonment, or arrest. This defect in the social, economic, and political structures in the world today has precipitated the crisis besetting the world at present, and produced the rulers who brag, fabricate, and distort the truth to justify their rule and their unjust policies. This policy is of no use to the peoples and the world, and cannot solve problems. When a reaction occurs, the people would say, "This reaction against us was by a person for whom we caused a problem." However, the ruler would not only transgress against another, but would not admit his error. Such fraud and deception does not serve the people, peace, mankind, or even those who espouse such logic. Since the social, economic, and political structures are based on error, so all actions are taken to justify this error, which breeds injustice, exploitation, and dictatorship. Peoples do not rule themselves, and there are no jamahiriya and no popular socialism, because all social relations are based on injustice and exploitation. Peoples are ruled by proxy, and laws are not passed by the people, but by someone else in the name of the people, which is a sham. The wealth of the earth belongs to all the inhabitants of the earth, and the wealth of every country belongs equally to all the people of that country. But this is not the case, because power and wealth are controlled by a handful which only attained its position by crooked means. Therefore, whatever policies are pursued is only designed to justify this fallacy. We, the common citizens, hear astounding things from governments and politicians. They tell us that black is white and white is black. What we see as black, they say is white, and we are expected to accept this distortion. This is amazing. The truth is, if you say, this is white, not black, then you are a rogue, a deviant, and wrong. They tell you, we said that it is black, and you say that it is white, which means that you disagreed with us, and whoever disagrees with us is a rogue and insane. This is a falsehood and a fallacy which is prevailing in the world today as a result of the marginalization of the peoples from wealth and power. If it were the peoples who passed laws, made decisions, and crafted policies, the world would be a world of peace, equanimity, stability, love, and cooperation, because peoples do not hate each other and seek peace and stability. No people would leave their land to occupy the land of another people. An army that leaves its country to occupy other countries is made up of needy people drafted by an unjust authority, which is the product of the wealth owned by a handful of exploiters, who made the politicians, who drafted the needy to form an army and ordered them to go and die outside their land, and if they come back, they are missing an arm and a leg, their eyesight, or their hearing. This is happening in the world today. If those soldiers who left their land to occupy and destroy another land had stayed home as ordinary people, they would not have had the desire to cross their borders and commit such heinous acts. But orders and need forced them to become soldiers for the politicians and the exploiters. And as long as they were soldiers, they would be given orders to die and colonize. Thus, in the world today, a blackout is imposed on the Green Book. They say the Green Book is a dangerous book written by Gaddafi, whereas in actual fact, the Green Book was not written by Al-Gaddafi, but the history of mankind.